Okay, we're ready to go.
Good morning. My name is Lorraine Jacobs, and Mark Miller and I are co-chairs of the Sunday Morning Forum Planning Group. We welcome you this morning and thank you for supporting Sunday Forums. For over 50 years at First Unitarian Society Milwaukee, the Sunday Forum Lecture Series has showcased speakers of interest for our members and friends. Forums are 1 hour in length and provide a presentation followed by questions. Scheduling and hosting these weekly programs is accomplished by volunteers. The presenters do not receive honoraria. The content of each forum may not always align with the viewpoint of First Unitarian Society Milwaukee. They are meant to offer topics which can be pursued further independently by those attending. Before we begin today, I'd like to remind you about next Sunday's forum, which will be on January 2nd. We will not have a forum on December 26th. The forum on January 2nd will be 2 presenters, John Kirikau and Fidel Navarez, and they'll be speaking on Julian Assange, Can Exposure Bring Justice? But today, we welcome Brent Hazelton, and he will be introduced by Thalis White-Drake, the forum host. Thalis, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Lorraine, and good morning to all. It's a pleasure to introduce Brent Hazelton, whom I proposed to the Forum Committee as the new director of the Milwaukee Chamber Theater. He's not that new because he's been in office about 2 years now, but we really haven't seen much of him unless you're one of their subscribers and have been introduced to him online with occasional interviews. But I was really amazed to find and delighted to know that he is a Wisconsin native, and right here in our town, must have been in the right spot at the right time because he follows 2 very distinguished and visible actors. Of course, Monty Davis from way back, and then C. Michael Wright, whom we've had speak on our forum a few years back. So I'm pleased to introduce you all to this handsome guy that's been hiding out for 20 years behind the scenes over at the Rep. Can you tell us a little bit how you got involved over on the East Side?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for sharing some of this really lovely Sunday morning with me. Much appreciated. So a little bit before we jump in, I mean, these things are always so much better if they're conversations as opposed to monologues. So please, as we are, excuse me, please, as we're going along here, do not hesitate to throw up a hand, ask a question, interrupt as we go if something strikes your fancy. And this can really be sort of ask me anything kind of situation, whether it's about chamber or just the world of professional theater in Milwaukee or generally in general. So yes, whatever burning questions you have ever had about playmaking, this is a wonderful opportunity to ask them. As Stella said, I'm from Wisconsin originally. I grew up in Whitewater, spent all 18 years there. Went to college in Iowa because when you're 18, you do things like saying, I got to get out of Whitewater, go to Iowa. Just far enough across the river that my parents could not make surprise visits, but still close enough that I could come home and do laundry. But a very small liberal arts school, which was exactly what I needed at the time, had a very small theater program. So I was able to immerse pretty deeply in all aspects, and a couple of professors and mentors there ran a small company in Iowa City. So I was able to get a lot of professional theater experience and exposure pretty early on. I thought when I was in college that I was going to be an actor. So graduated from college and then came to the Rep as an acting intern in 1999. Learned very quickly through that internship that I probably should figure out something else to do to try to feed myself in life, because not many people were probably going to be interested in paying me to do that. It's trying to do it off and on. I had much more success doing commercial and industrial and on camera work than I ever did anything on stage. The last play I will admit to being in was in the fall of 2002. So it's been a bit there, but was really, really fortunate to be able to stay around the rep after that internship. So house managed the Steam Key studio. The next year after the internship, then I must have written some really great house management reports, I guess, because after that spent 2 years as the administrative assistant to the artistic staff, then moved up to an artistic associate position where I ran the internship program, and over the course of about the next 8 years, built that into what became widely regarded as one of the 2 best transitional programs for emerging professional artists in regional theater. Was us and Actors Theater of Louisville in Kentucky that everybody sort of looked at as the apex of that. Then when Mark Clements came in as artistic director, moved up to associate artistic director, and began building our new play development program. And through that, worked on about 24 world premiere productions. After 10 years of that, became pretty clear that that was sort of gonna be the rest of it, right? Like there was nowhere else to go, there was nowhere else to move in that organization. And as lovely a place as it is, and as lovely as the work is, was feeling a little bit plateaued. And the opportunity to succeed Michael presented itself, and jumped at that, and was very, very fortunate to be given that opportunity. And then a pandemic happened, and that kind of takes us right to today. So it's been, it's been a little crazy. I mean, I actually was appointed to the position December 17th, so just a couple days ago in 2018. As of July 1st of 2019, the plan was that I would spend the 1920 season working part-time, just sort of observing, learning what I needed to learn from Michael, meeting some donors, planning the season, sort of a light, gentle transition into the company. About 3 months into that, Kirsten Finn, who was the managing director at the time, surprisingly departed the position to take a job at the Wisconsin Bike Federation. So I sort of became the managing director at that point. Had enough of that skill set from spending 20 years on the producing side at the rep to be able to navigate my way through that, but was also, as somebody coming in, a really great opportunity to learn the financial structure of the organization from the inside, to actually understand the way the place worked, because you can't really, this is true for any business, but you can't really know how to make the product or make the product better until you understand the way the money flows. So that was a really great, blessing in disguise, I guess. Certainly not expected. And that jump from 25 up to like 50 hours a week was a little bit of a shock to a system that was becoming very comfortable with this sort of 25-hour a week experience after coming out of the rep, where I spent about 10 years working between 80 and 90 hours a week. So just as we were getting all that sort of sorted out, we had the 2021 season planned, went on vacation with my wife to Arizona, came back to Milwaukee March 10th, and we were, running around national parks and things, so we're quite off the grid. Remember getting to the airport in Tucson on the 9th and sort of thinking, oh, what's going on out in New York? Are we gonna have to worry about this? Are we gonna get home? So came back March 10th, did a donor event around our new play development program here at Chamber on March 10th. March 11th, definitely started getting worried about things, and then was having, emergency board meetings on March 12th. We had on March 12th about $11,000 liquid in the bank. We had just come out of a situation where we're getting ready to move into our final production of the season. So we had basically realized all of the expense on that production, but we're not going to realize any of the income because we weren't going to be able to produce it. So we're in terms of liquidity, in a fairly precarious financial position. And immediately the job sort of became, great, how do we get to tomorrow? And once we got to tomorrow, then how do we get to 2 days from now? And how do we get to the end of the week? And how do we get to the end of 2 weeks from now? And eventually was able to push cash flow enough that we were sort of looking at like, okay, we have a 2 or 3 month cushion now that we can navigate and operate in. At that point, our current managing director, Amy Sallet, joined us, came down from the University of Minnesota in the beginning of June 2020. So sort of parachuted right into the apex of, we'd have no idea what's going on in this pandemic. Brand new to Milwaukee, brand new to the company, had no sort of relationships here. So I had it very comparatively easy relative to what Amy was facing when she came in. But it was in figuring out what we were going to do and how we were going to navigate. We knew that at that time, and this was before the PPP or the SBA or any of the SVO grants, things like that. So we were facing a situation where, just based on cash flow, we had to earn in order to survive. The only way to earn was to create a season. So we very quickly resolved that we needed to deliver somehow a 5-play season for our subscribers, because that was the only resource we had, couldn't give that money back. But also it was really important in this transition that no one forget about us, and that we start to really tell the community what Milwaukee Chamber Theater was going to be moving forward. We couldn't afford in this transition season to sort of take a year off, because we knew there was going to be change happening anyway. Unlike the Rep or Next Act or Renaissance Theater Works that were not also going through a leadership transition at the time, we sort of had that added degree of difficulty to contend with. So we started a conversation with Actors Equity Association, which is the union that represents professional actors and stage managers in America. We work with them often. Most of the actors we use are Actors Equity Association members. About May of 2020, they sort of shut down the entire industry, saying it's not safe for our artists to work, so no one's working. We started a conversation with them early June 2020, just about how we create a situation where we could just do virtual theater, right? This thing that everybody wound up doing about 6-8 months later. We started that conversation with them. It took us about 7 months to get to a place where we had a safety and work practice that they found acceptable. So we're able to rolling out a virtual season in the beginning of January. And that was that delay was a very intentional act on our part. So a lot of our colleague theaters, when they were starting to make those virtual productions, were moving over to Screen Actors Guild contracts, which is the union that most of actors in the film industry work under. Two different unions for stage and film actors. SAG never really stopped their operations. They took a month or so, figured out, based on what we knew at the time, this is what we think safe practice for film sets is. And because of the jurisdictional change, right, we're not making theater anymore. We're basically making movies. Many of our colleague theaters moved over to SAG contracts and were able to get virtual content out much sooner than we were. We committed early on to walking that path with equity, because for our local artists, SAG contracts carry virtually no benefit. There are very few SAG members in Milwaukee. And one of the other reasons that we knew that we needed to move ahead with this virtual season was because part of our mission is supporting local artists. That language is there, it says it right in the mission. And to my mind, there was no greater means of offering support to local artists in this situation than by continuing to get them as much work as possible so they could continue to earn health insurance week credits. So with the Actors Union, actors only get health benefits when they work. And you amass a certain number of work weeks every year, and that allows you to get insurance for the next 6 months. So looking at a situation where in a global health crisis, the vast majority of the American professional acting community was going to suddenly be without health insurance, seemed like something we wanted to do something about if we could. So that was really the core reason to commit to following that path with equity, and to really making sure we could get a deal done with them so that we could continue to get our folks in this town some health weeks, which were really, really important. And we wound up very proudly providing more health insurance weeks for equity actors in the 2021 season than anyone else in the state of Wisconsin. Offered more actor income in the 2021 season than anyone else in the state of Wisconsin. And that counts for the health weeks count for Actors Equity members, as well as the Designers Union, United Scenic Artists, the Directors Union, stage directors and choreographers. So really, really did everything we could, spent as much of that PPP money as we could as it was intended, right? To redirect to people who were sort of the most hurt in this situation, which for us were the freelance artists in the community. So that was a success, we thought. We also, before we did that 4-play virtual season in August, started, however you want to say it, the Milwaukee Black Theater Festival, because we knew that we had, to get a show up in August, to get something out right away to replace that first production. And was talking to Malkia Stampley and DeMonte Henning and Sherry Williams Pinnell back in May, and really felt a strong need to respond as artists to all of the upsurge in social justice activities that were happening in the country at the time. And we're unsure how to do that, given that there was a pandemic, right? Normally we're artists. We're going to very quickly get together a reading or put up a production and gather audiences and have a conversation with our community about how we as a community respond to these situations. How do we support people who are attempting to work for a fuller activation of human rights? But we couldn't do that because we couldn't all get in a room together. So created a virtual theater festival, which consisted of about 9 hours total of content framed around readings of 3 plays, and then all sorts of supplemental material from artists across a wide variety of disciplines responding to that content, which was I think a wonderfully successful thing, not only for us as a team, to have that be sort of the first thing that this new version of Milwaukee Chamber Theater creates, but also as a rallying point and a conversation point for community. And the second annual festival happened this past August, was one of the first post-vaccination, I think the first in Milwaukee post-vaccination live theater event that happened. So certainly proud that exists and will carry on. But we also, sort of using that festival as a jumping off point, one of the things that I am committed to as a theater artist is widening representation and access in the art form. I don't come to theater as I guess a theater native. My dad's an auto mechanic. My mom sold cosmetics. So I don't know why I'm where I am right now, other than, my mom watched a lot of PBS, and I like to create very intricate scenes with my Star Wars guys. I have no idea. But telling stories has always been something that I'm very, very interested in. But did not have a strong upbringing in the arts, particularly theater. Do not come from a position of means, right, as many theater artists do. So I've always felt a little bit like an outsider in this work and inside these industries. And for me, that outsider perspective has sort of led to a desire to open the doors as widely as possible to as many people as possible in this art. Did that through the internship program, in terms of recruiting a significant number of young artists of color. Did that through the new play development program by always making sure that we were considering stories and perspectives of color through the lens of writers of color. And our virtual season last season was, we believe, we have not done the years and years and years of data searching that this would require, but based on the eye test and having been around for a few decades, we're pretty sure was the most representatively diverse season in the history of PWI professional theater in Wisconsin. And the same holds true for the current season that we're producing live on stage this year. So the goal moving forward with the company is to continue to hold on to all the hallmarks, that Monty started, that Michael refined. Strong local focus, focus on text-based theater with very interesting perspectives, interesting voices, high quality text at its center, and nurturing the next generation. So for me, it's about holding on to those 3 ideas, framing the whole thing under an umbrella of much broadened representation and inclusion, such that the company looks like the city. We have to earn the Milwaukee in our title. You don't just get that. And that means all of Milwaukee. That does not mean, just far North Shore and far West Side Milwaukee Chamber Theater. It means Milwaukee. So the goal for us is really to create a conversation inside the theater about how this city can be its best self for everybody who calls it home. I think the only thing the theater promises really is as a space to listen. That's it. You're going to come in, you're going to buy your ticket, you're going to sit in a chair, and you're just going to listen for a while. Respond as you will, but you're going to listen. And I think in that space, what we're listening for is the answer to a question. Is how we're living today the way we want to live tomorrow? And if it's not, what do we want to do about it? And when we're listening for that answer in the company of a whole lot of other people, and ideally a whole lot of other people who don't seemingly look like us, right? Or aren't us, or in some way different, what we invariably learn is that they're responding exactly the same way we are. And we are fundamentally the same in terms of core human need and desire. And that I think really helps us get at the core of a healthy conversation around that is how we're living today the way we want to live. And hopefully, if we're asking that question properly in the theater, the what are we going to do about it is the part that happens for the audience when they are outside the theater. So in many ways, the work is, for me, a trigger for larger community conversations. Things that where people are able to put whatever energy or idea or hope or optimism or sense of activation to work in the community. Even if that is just walking across the street and saying hey to your neighbor in a way you never have before, that still helps bring this community closer together. And as the most segregated city in the country, I think that is our job as a theater, and that is our job as theater makers, is to figure out how we bring this community closer together. It's well past time for that situation to end itself. And the only way we can do that is by creating desegregated spaces where people can gather and actually entertain the idea that we could possibly organize this community in a way different than it is now. So that's the work I hope we're doing here at Chamber. I hope we're doing it in an open-hearted, progressive, fun, welcoming spirit, because nobody likes a lecture. But also, doing it through voices and perspectives that we may not traditionally see on stage. So for example, the play we have up right now, the Thanksgiving play by Larissa Fast Horse. Larissa is a Lakota Indigenous author. This is, we again believe, the first time that a professional theater company in Wisconsin has produced a play by an Indigenous writer. We're all sort of suspecting that in the 70s, the rep did something that people just aren't remembering. But as far as we know, that's the first time. It's a fundamentally unique voice. It's a very, very funny play that satirizes the failings of white liberalism, but also asks some very kind of pointed questions about the lack of presence of Indigenous and Native American culture in contemporary American society. It's also very, very funny in a way that, I mean, a lot of the audience spent sort of half the time watching the show kind of like this, and I will say it closes today. We have a show at 2:00. So if you have not seen it yet and get down to the theater by 2:00, we do have tickets available. So join us for it. 90 minutes, no intermission. We are also, like most of the other performing arts groups in the city, not all of them, unfortunately, but most of them requiring proof of vaccination or a COVID test within the last 72 hours for admittance. And everybody in the building has to stay masked the whole time. And that includes everyone in the theater as well. People have been super cool about that so far, because I think everybody understands that, it's a little thing we have to do to allow ourselves to gather for live stories. And we can easily screw that up. So everybody has been very, very careful about doing their part to keep it safe. And we are now, I'm going to find a little wood to knock on real quick, be right back. But, including the virtual season, we are now into our 7th in-person COVID-free production, which we feel good about, and good about our practice and good about our process. Should also say, looping back a little bit to that agreement we made with Actors Equity Association, we were one of the first companies in the country, not just in the state, but the first companies in the country to be able to gather artists in person, to create those virtual seasons. The first company in the state to do it, ultimately only one of 2 total that received that permission in the 2021 season. So we are very, very proud of not only what we've been able to achieve as a very small company in this space, but also very, very proud of doing it in a way that not only allows everyone to feel as safe as they possibly could, but is actually keeping folks as safe as they possibly can be. That's job one for us. There's no point in gathering human beings together in a room unless you can do it safely. And we're feeling really, really good about that, and hopefully are able to continue that through what looks like is going to be another significant wintertime surge, and hopefully get to next spring. And would love to be in a situation where we finally take care of this thing once and for all next summer, when everyone gets their act together and does their individual parts to help us get past this, so we can gather with full hearts again next fall. But a lot of time between now and then. Dallas, I saw your hand up before. Yeah, what's...
Well, you did mention virtual season, and I
Mhm.
know some of the things you did last year were spectacular,
Oh, good. Thank you.
particularly the island. I thought that was stunning, and I'm looking forward to somehow seeing it again this year.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, you hardly have had time to shave. Because first thing you know, your January production has had to be bumped.
Yep.
And I don't know if we're going to be able to see that online with such short notice.
Well, so this year we're not virtualizing anything this year.
Oh dear.
Yeah, it was. I mean, a couple of reasons. So two of the productions in our current season were in that virtual season, the Thanksgiving play and the Island. Bringing those back not only because as we are moving out of this pandemic and trying to rebuild our budget, the cost savings of those two productions was certainly significant to include in there, but also because those felt like, of everything we did in the virtual season, not only the two things that people responded to most positively, but the two things that we felt could most benefit from being seen in person, particularly the Thanksgiving play. Because, sitting on your couch laughing by yourself is one thing, but being able to do it in a room full of 40 or 50 other people is tremendous. I mean, the first collective laugh at the first preview for Thanksgiving play was one of the most beautiful sounds I've ever heard, after being in this virtual space for so long, just to suddenly have people responding so full-heartedly to that work. And then the Island, just the emotional potency that comes from being in that space with those two actors, with that story, I think is a transcendently different thing from what we would have seen on the screen. And I'm certainly very, very excited to share that with a group of folks in person. The other thing is not a ton of people saw the virtual work that we did last year. Certainly many of our core subscribers, many of the core single ticket buyers, but much of our audience does not or did not at the time have access to those platforms. Many audience members don't have computers in their homes, which is amazing to me. I'm not quite sure how you function in today's society without a computer or an email address, like how do you shop for things? But so making sure that everybody has a shot to see them is great. They were also the two that the virtual audience most responded to. Oh, we're so sorry we can't see this in person. We would love to see this live. So 2 of 5 we already have virtual recordings of if we need to use them. Excuse me, I'm so dry today. I don't know why. The 4th show in the season, Indecent, the virtual rights are not available for. There's an excellent virtual production recording of the Broadway production of that show that's available through great performances. Really, really a stunning capture of that piece of theater. But we couldn't even record that one if we wanted to because the rights are held up there. Our production of Stew, was from the first annual Milwaukee Black Theater Festival where we did a reading. At that point, we're looking at perhaps virtualizing 2 of 5, which doesn't make a ton of sense in terms of an overall season package. And given the relative expense of that, was just not something that we could absorb in the budget this year. So as much as we would love to be able to continue providing virtual options for folks, what it would have cost us relative to the return we would have made on it just didn't make sense in a season where the budget is super compressed. The January show, which was Where Did We Sit on the Bus, which hopefully we will see next season, and now is Mala due to an unforeseen actor injury, right? Like these things just happen sometimes, you know? But particularly for us, as we are, another element of that uniqueness of voice notion is building our productions around sort of singular performers, right? And particularly in Milwaukee, the diversity of talent and the expertise here is wonderful and high, and one of the reasons I love working in this town. But the bench is not very deep, so we sort of have one person per skill set, right? And if for whatever reason that skill set is unavailable to us, it means if we want to continue to hold true to our mission, we have to make a different title choice, because we simply don't have somebody else that we can just sort of slot in there as we would if we were in Chicago or New York, or had the wherewithal to look a little further afield. But I'm super excited about Mala. Getting to work with Raina Roman is wonderful. We did our town together at the Rep. Really looking forward to getting back in the rehearsal hall with my friend. But a really beautiful story, and one that we're really excited to tell as a company. A sort of quirky comedy about the way our lives change as our parents move through different stages of life. And how we need to, how our roles as caretakers or caregivers shift so radically, and what that means in our lives, as we go from being children to very active caregivers, and how those roles reversals happen very quickly and very unexpectedly. But it's also something I don't think in American culture we really talk about very much. Everyone I know who's had that experience has to sort of go through it by themselves. And, my parents are both in their mid-70s, both thankfully very healthy human beings who are still quite physically active. But not seeing them for 2 years over the course of this pandemic, really, I was shocked at how much they had aged in that 2 years when I did see them. And they both got COVID earlier this fall. Both, vaccinated, mask wearing, careful people. They assume they picked it up in their weekly exercise class. A bunch of folks sitting around in chairs just sort of doing knee lifts and stuff, and that assume is where they got it from. My mom had a rougher go of it than my dad did, certainly lingered longer. They were both very fortunate to get the antibody treatment right away. They live in a college town in Kentucky. They moved out of Wisconsin about 6 years ago now to get away from winter and property tax, but are in Western Kentucky, where there's access to some pretty great healthcare. So they were, able to get the treatments they needed. But, that lingered with my mom for about 6 to 8 weeks. And just that sense of, what does that mean? How long is this going to linger? How permanently changed are my parents going to be over this? What does that mean for me now? My wife right now going through a very similar situation with her dad and his partner. She's from Omaha. They live there. She's been making trips out there twice a month for the past few months now, because there's a greater degree of caretaking now quite suddenly that needs to happen, that just can't be done remotely. So the play is very, very resonant for a lot of us in the office, and hopefully is going to encourage people to have that challenging conversation. Challenging because it's necessarily inherently hard, but because it's a sort of topic and territory that we shy away from. We are partnering with the United Community Center, working on telling the story, building audience, and building conversations around it. Because in addition to the play having a particularly Latinx perspective from its writer and the storytelling at its center, the United Community Center also has a very large elder care community attached to it. So being able to build a larger community conversation about how we navigate elder care, and how we navigate trying to reframe ourselves as caregivers, how we, all those sort of life upheavals where we're trying to continue to move through our own lives. For many of us, caregiving for children as well as parents simultaneously. It's, as people are living longer, it's challenging new territory that I don't know that we address much. I will also say that play is very funny, in a sort of Yep, that's happened to me. That's really real sort of way. A sort of quirky, darkly comic view of just the absurdity and ironies of some of these situations we find ourselves in. 70 minutes, no intermission, masks and vaccination. We're in the studio theater, keeping people as spread out as we can again. So it's, we're trying to create as safe a structure as we possibly can for people to join us in, and certainly realize that a lot of folks just aren't ready to take that step yet. I feel I have not, as somebody who really enjoys food, a surprise probably, but certainly loves restaurants in Milwaukee. I live down in Bayview. We have sort of the best restaurant concentration per capita anywhere in the city. I haven't had a meal in a restaurant in coming on 3 years now. And I don't know when I will again, so I certainly understand that we all have our own limitations and thresholds to cross, but we're doing everything we can to make sure that folks are as safe as they can possibly be in those spaces. So Mala's coming up. After that is Indecent, which is back in the Cabot Theater. So we'll have folks even more spread out in the Cabot, but a really incredible piece of theater that I hope we're able to serve well, but that I think is a great encapsulation of the kind of work and the scale of work that we want to be trying to do as a company moving forward, and then finishing up the season with The Island back in the studio. But for us, it costs about it costs anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000 to create a virtual production. On the way we want to do it, right? There are cheaper ways to do it, but I don't think any of us would be satisfied with the result, and I would not feel good about putting a less expensive version out there in the world to patrons, because the reaction that we would want is your reaction to The Island, Alice, where it's just like, oh, that's stunning. That's really, it feels like we're sort of almost in a theater again. And we just don't have that in the budget this year, fortunately.
Are we ever going to see you on stage other than your welcoming?
No, nobody wants that, believe me. I learned very early on that the greatest gift I could give to Milwaukee theater was to stop trying to be an actor. No, my skill set definitely lies as a director, as a playwright, as an administrator, as a programmer, as a community builder. But every once in a while I sort of get an itch and think like, maybe. But mostly because I understand what acting is now in a way that I did not when I was 22. Had no idea what that was about or how to do it, or just was clueless. So definitely I think would be better now than I was then. But man, just the prospect of learning the words is like, that's a lot of work. That sounds like a drag. I just don't wanna. Yeah. Dennis, do I see your hand up?
Yeah.
I'm sorry I missed the very beginning of your presentation. You may have mentioned this,
Yeah.
but what kind of support, if any, did you get from the federal government? Was there anything particularly for artists to help you guys keep going?
Yeah, well, and this is where we're sort of falling down as a nation, right? And you'll forgive me if I editorialize a little bit here about the perils of late stage capitalism, but all of the funding that came out of the federal government for arts and performing artists was very much directed towards institutions. So this notion that institutions that the corporate entity, right, is the best possible way to get people relief, we saw in the way money was structured from the federal government. I think that's true to a certain extent, and I think there are a lot of freelance artists who fell through the cracks of a lot of those relief programs. What we're seeing right now is a major talent drain in the industry that's going to take us decades to recover from, because there were people who were not able to access that relief and had to move out of the industry to feed themselves, literally. So it's a problem, and it's going to take a long time for us to recover from that. It does create an opportunity for a generational shift in the way that we do our work. Going back to, again, this sort of outsider perspective, a whole lot of other people who may not feel native to this work, or who may not have felt like, oh, I have a path into this, perhaps now do, because there are some more openings. So that's a silver lining in what was a bit of a dark cloud in terms of the way the relief funding came out. But we were very fortunate. We have a terrific development director who's very on these things and was able to chase a lot of these resources. So we received funding from the PPP, both sessions, the first PPP and second PPP. The SVO grant, Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, also received a significant amount of funding from. And then smaller things, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, received that as just a modest loan of $25,000 at a very low interest rate. It's 1% that you can pay back over the course of 10 or 20 years. So essentially as free as money gets in the world, which is a great opportunity. But all told, we received about $200,000 through PPP and somewhere, I believe, around 100 from the SVO program. And, you know, that sustained us last season. And, you know, we, like I said a little bit earlier, we attempted to redirect as much of that as we possibly could into the hands of artists, because that was the point, right? The PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, is all about protecting people's paychecks so that, you know, you can still compensate them even if they're not working. And we're able to use that money to actually create work to pay people. And when we did that virtual season, in addition to the Milwaukee Black Theater Festival, and then The Island, The Way She Spoke, Underneath the Lintel, and the Thanksgiving Play as the core, you know, 5-play subscription season, we also created a lot of new programming. Did something we called Season's Greetings from MCT, where we basically just paid individual artists to create home movies about their holiday traditions that we just gave away for free as sort of our gift to the community in December. Some really, really inventive stuff came through there. Like Malkia Stampley and her husband, Chike Johnson, created like a half-hour sort of Hallmark movie riff on Kwanzaa celebrations. Elise Edelman did like an 8-night home video series on the 8-night of Hanukkah celebrations. Raina and her brother David did a cooking show about their family. I mean, some really, really fun stuff came through there. But again, trying to continue in everything we do to make sure that people understand the deep diversity of culture that we have in our community. So the funding was crucial. Like I'm not gonna lie, we probably don't exist right now if we didn't have that money. So definitely lifeblood, but also able to do a lot of positive things for some members of our theater community, right? I mean, we provided something like, I think 150 or 160 health insurance weeks to 50 or 60 different artists, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to what the actual scale of need is. And you know, you multiply that by every arts community in the country, and the need is still huge. And particularly, the companies that focus locally in the way that we do are the ones that are hardest hit, and that have the biggest hole to climb out of. But no, were it not for that federal funding, we would not. We may not be having this conversation now, because I might be working at McDonald's or something.
I'm sure you'd be good at it.
I mean, look, I was a pretty competent pizza maker in high school. I'm not going to lie, at the Whitewater Rocky Rococos. So I don't know that I'm eager to return to it, but yeah, I could flip some dough. Then another one for you, Dennis, or is that still up from the first one?
Yes, you mentioned an eye test. That sounded pretty interesting. Can you say a little bit about that?
Oh, just not like an actual literal like eye test or anything, but just sort of looking at like what we know the work in our community, in our state, and our overall theater ecology to be, and just sort of measuring ourselves about that, as opposed to actually doing any real deep sort of statistical research that we just haven't had the time or the opportunity to do. But yeah, our administrator heard from.
Yeah.
Hi, Joanne.
Hi. Okay, my family is in Fairfield, Iowa, which is
Yes.
near Iowa City.
Yes.
Yes,
Know it well.
part of the MIU community. So I
Mhm.
wanted to know what college you actually went to in Iowa City.
Yeah, Cornell College in Mount Vernon. So about 20 minutes down Highway 1 from Iowa City. School of 1,200 in a town of 1,200 surrounded by corn. Part of that little league of Iowa liberal arts colleges like, who else is in there? Like Luther and Drake. And then some from Wisconsin and Illinois, Minnesota as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed it. As much as we would sort of jealously look to Iowa City from our town of 1,200 as like, oh, there are things to do there. It was right where I needed to be at the time. What else? Any other thoughts, questions from anybody?
Well, I can ask a question.
Yeah, Lorraine.
Oh, and Frank too. Well, just quickly, prior to pandemic, what's the perception of live theater in Milwaukee by others around the country? How are we perceived and
Yeah, I don't
noticed?
know anymore, honestly. When I first got here 20 years ago, Milwaukee was widely regarded as a jewel of a sort of second tier theater city, right? Second tier, not in terms of quality, second tier in terms of like population of metro area and like size, right? Because we had been known for so long as a real center of classical acting in this country, which was built largely from when the professional theater training program was based here at UWM, creating hundreds of amazing classical actors, many of whom stayed in Milwaukee, made their lives and homes here, between the Rep and APT, but also who populated many of the large regional repertory theaters in the country, and spread a really, really strong reputation for Milwaukee as a center not only for high quality acting, but specific classic elevated text, high caliber language. That's certainly faded away. That program's not been here now since I think the late 1980s. Most of the artists in that generation are moving into the later phase of their careers. And the theater community in Milwaukee is significantly smaller than it was when I got here. In the late 1990s, there were something like 15 companies in this city that were offering some form of equity contract. Now there are 6. So there's been a significant retraction to the scope and scale of work available, which certainly has meant that artists don't make homes here anymore. And that's one of the things that, this notion of focusing locally that has been in Chamber's mission for so long. Again, looking at that through a more contemporary lens, one of my jobs and one of the functions of this company is to rebuild our local theater community. So to be able to provide more work for more artists, so more people can make a consistent home here, and we can begin to rebuild that base. Now, of course, that means more dollars, right? We need more money in order to hire more people. That's just a fact of life. And have to figure out how to acquire that so we really can begin doing that rebuild. So, I think there has been if you're speaking of it specifically through the lens of community, there has definitely been a diminishment over the past 2 decades in terms of scope and scale and volume. The quality bar of the work, I think, has gone up. From what I remember it being 20 years ago when I got here. Things seem higher across the board, but there's definitely less to go around, which is a challenge. Yeah.
Thank you.
Frank, what do you got?
Frank has been waiting. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering, COVID has been such a life-altering situation for all of us. Do you just to try and get a little nugget of positive? Do you see any benefits that have come out of the whole adjustment to it?
Well,
maybe
not sure. Look, there's a lot of practices that we had sort of always done that I think we're never gonna go back to, right? Like nobody's working sick anymore, right? Which is a thing that actors had always done, right? This sort of like, unless my leg is falling off and I am bleeding out, I am gonna be on that stage. That's done, right? That's not happening anymore, and that's great. One of the things that not putting work on stages for a year allowed us to do, which coincided with the more assertive push for social justice in this country, was to really interrogate fairly deeply a lot of the ways that the American theater continues to and has always operated from a white supremacist perspective. Not in a sort of KKK white supremacist way, but in a Eurocentric white lens being the predominant lens that our work is viewed through and that the institutions are built around, right? Which seems very inconsistent with America and very inconsistent with the community of Milwaukee. So many companies, took a close, hard look at themselves. I think the industry is feeling right now that a lot of companies made a lot of promises during that time that are not being delivered on right now. But that just gives us an opportunity to say, okay, really, how do we do this better? Again, we're taking this opportunity to move ahead with that work as assertively as we can, and include as many different perspectives in our storytelling as possible. So I think that notion of being able to emerge from a period of shift in focus with a different perspective on the world is valued. There's rarely do you have as an institutional entity an opportunity to sort of stop for a second, point yourself in a new direction, and then head in that direction. Those transitions are usually much longer and much more graceful / arduous than I think what the space has afforded us to be able to do now for those of us who are interested in taking advantage of the opportunity. Beyond that, I don't know that there's a ton of upside, really.
Yeah.
We have a lot of audience members who are not coming back. People who are of a sufficient age right now to realize that they are at a higher risk to catch a very serious illness, and don't want to put themselves in groups of people to do that. Totally get it, totally respect it. Goes back to what I was saying about restaurants before for me personally. By the time we get this thing under some semblance of control that those people may feel comfortable in returning again, either the habit is going to be so far gone that they're not going to pick it up again, or they will have reached an age where they would likely not be attending theater anyway, even in a healthy space. So we're just at a really, really tricky point of transition right now. And resource helps us navigate that transition, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. The more financial surety we have, the more quickly we can move through this space. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of upheaval, and out of upheaval, if you do it right, can come some good things. But right now, it still feels like just mostly a lot of upheaval.
Thanks.
It's like you're just keeping at it every day.
We're trying.
Way to go.
Anne, is that a yellow hand?
And she had a chat too with some college listings. So I'm curious.
Oh,
Ann.
yep, those are them.
Yeah, other colleges. Yeah, I went to one of those, Lawrence.
Oh,
Nice.
So I was just wondering, is there anything different about a Milwaukee audience, say, than a Chicago audience? Or, I mean, do you find that you make specifically with a Wisconsin or a Milwaukee audience in mind?
I don't know, different necessarily. One of the reasons that I have never really been interested in working anywhere else is because for me, the art of making plays is about having a very active conversation with a community, right? A very ongoing conversation with the community. So I don't really know how to talk to people in Cincinnati or Little Rock or Seattle. Like, I'm sure they're cool. I'm sure they're concerned with the same things we are, but in terms of being able to specifically engage in that dialogue, I don't know them. I don't know really what they're interested in, and I don't know the specifics that they respond to. So for me, it's always about trying to create the work with that conversation in mind. So I don't know what it means other than that, but definitely sort of knowing the audience and knowing what they may respond to or what we may want to say to them in a given, what is on this community's mind right now, right? Are always the ways that we try to program. Differences of audience. I mean, people are kind of people. I think there is, I haven't spent a ton of time in Chicago, but just being an audience member for some shows in Chicago, there's a different feel to it. I think there's less, I think there's a little less cynicism in a Milwaukee audience. I think there is a greater desire to engage emotionally with the art. I think there is a baseline sort of genuine Midwestern curiosity about the world and generosity towards other people that I feel in a Milwaukee audience. I sometimes wish Milwaukee audiences were a little more discerning about standing ovations. That is sort of the joke that people will stand for anything. Or sometimes it's like, oh, are they just standing up because that's the first part of walking to the car quicker and they're just too polite to leave right away, so they're going to clap while they're, you know. But yeah, you know, it's always trying to raise the bar on the quality of the work, right? And you know, wishing that it's the same thing with Milwaukee artists, right? Most Milwaukee theater artists don't work outside of Milwaukee. So we have a theater community that can tend to be a bit insular and a bit inward looking. And I think sometimes, not for everybody, but I think sometimes the audience comes with that same view because not a lot of us get down to Chicago to see things, right? And part of that is because there's so much work available here. Right. I mean, most people who love the theater in Milwaukee can't even see all the theater in Milwaukee. So I think the feeling is like, well, unless it's something really, really special, why go to Chicago when I can't even take advantage of everything that's in my hometown?
Are you still able to reach out to school children?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on certainly what MPS is doing in terms of field trips, things like that. We had a student matinee, I think for Thanksgiving break, which, you know, had about 30 kids in the room. So we're starting to move back to that. But you know, it's as unstable as everything else is right now.
The Thanksgiving play would have been a learning situation for them.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Ann.
Thank you.
What else? I think we got like 3 minutes left, if I'm remembering the timeline in the email
Yeah,
correctly.
you got it.
Any last burning 180-second questions?
I just hope the committee realized what a wonderful morning we were going to have.
Well, good. Well, I hope
I
they
think
did.
Joanne has her hand up again. Joanne?
right.
Yes?
Yeah. I just want to say that you've convinced me, and I do tend to go to your next production.
Oh, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I wish I could go today, but I've already got a commitment to go see the one at the symphony. So
Nice. Well, enjoy that.
I really like the fact that you have such a diverse offerings.
Mhm.
That's great.
Yeah, good. No, it's we just have to, right? We can't do it the way we were doing it. And you know, I think a lot of us who are my age, sort of the Gen X leaders in the theater now, also millennial leaders, are realizing that now that we're in charge and can make those decisions, we can just do things that way now. So I'm very glad to hear that that's resonating with you. Those are certainly the traditional theater audience members who are going to help keep our base strong as we are widening our reach and speaking to more and more people.
Thank you for being with us this morning.
Mhm.
No, my pleasure.
Yes.
Really, I thank you for the invitation. You're lovely humans. I enjoyed this very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It
Thank
was
you.
beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to end the live stream now. Thanks. And
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
the meeting.
Bye, Brent.
All right. Take care, all. Thank you.